Good afternoon. Thanks for attending the Certified Engagement Practitioner course, Class 1, An Introduction to Enterprise Engagement and Stakeholder Capitalism. So what is it? Why now? What are the basic principles and framework? And then I'm going to talk today about consumer and channel engagement principles. So once again, thanks for attending. Just as quick background, the Enterprise Engagement Alliance is an affiliate of the International Center for Enterprise Engagement, and we're all about promoting the strategic and systematic approach to managing human capital and engagement across the enterprise. My colleagues are Alan Schweier. He's president of TMLU, which is a training company, and also he's a chief academic advisor for the Incentive Research Foundation. And finally, Gary Rhodes, he is CEO of Exvoyant, a leading sales engagement company. He's an EEA academic advisor, as I said, and he is professor emeritus of marketing and entrepreneurship at Marriott Graduate School of Business at the Brigham Young University. And forgive me, folks, this is a non-video program because it's part of a formal training and certification. And the last thing you need to do is see my face. But if you have any questions, you can ask questions right up here on your screen at the top, and I will answer them. But I will hold off answers until the end. So unless it's really pressing. So first, just a quick explanation. The Certified Engagement Practitioner Exam and Certification Program is a means of demonstrating your knowledge of the principles and applications of an enterprise approach to engaging people, which of course I'll get into in greater depth. And there is a advanced version for those who have management experience. You had to have at least 3 years of management experience, and you have to do a further exercise of developing a formal engagement plan. For the basic certification, there's actually, this deck hasn't been updated. There's actually 5 classes, I'm sorry. We're just kind of updating the new one. It's about the same amount of time, and they can either be done live. This month, we'll be doing each of them live, and I'll be sending out a schedule for that, or you'll be able to access them on a recorded basis. And then, so after learning about these, you also, all members are receiving our books, Enterprise Engagement for CEOs, and that's designed to be a quick read and is really sufficient to earn the CEP. And then there's our bigger book that members do get as well. That's the textbook. That's 312 pages, textbook size. And that's really meant to be a desk reference for those of you who really take implementation seriously. And your EEA membership manual explains all of this, but I'm always happy to talk with folks individually. So again, the Certified Engagement Practitioner designation signifies that you've got a general knowledge of the principles of enterprise engagement and its embodiment in ISO standards. Your preparation, as I said, is through these webinars, and this is being updated that it will be 4 to 5 webinar classes that can be done on your own or again live. And then finally, there's a 30-minute to 60-minute online interview with a senior IC advisor, myself or Alan Schweier, who will select from the general questions that you'll be seeing in many respects during these learning programs that you will need to be able to answer correctly in a phone interview that is recorded via a web meeting. So you'll even have to dress up, at least from the top up. So, and the things that you need to know are enterprise engagement, its framework and definition, its economics. You want to have a general idea of ISO standards that are related to this. You should know what an ISO audit is, very simple, what a corporate responsibility report is, a brief history and background of the concepts, the economic benefits, the challenges. What are the responsibilities of somebody in charge, a chief engagement officer? What are the return on benefits metrics? How to sell senior management and CEOs on this concept? An overview of the key tools of engagement and how they interrelate, and what is an enterprise engagement business plan and operating system. So you're going to learn plenty of things, but the good thing is it's not rocket science. It really is, in many sense, a very simple process that just about anybody can understand. The real challenge, of course, is its application. So I'm actually going to move to slideshow mode here. So bear with me one second. Excuse me. So let's start getting into definitions. And those of you who attended, if anybody did, our recent ROI of engagement webinar with Gary Rhodes and Todd Hansen, you're going to see a few slides here from that, but do not despair. Most of this is fresh material, and it will be a good reminder for you. So again, to understand these different definitions, human capital management is a formal business process that helps organizations sustainably achieve financial or other goals by fostering the engagement of all stakeholders. Every business can benefit from a formal enterprise engagement plan or business operating system that addresses the needs of all stakeholders in a systematic way. And that's why we call it the process enterprise engagement. Stakeholder capitalism, that's the name for this broader movement that was originated by the World Economic Forum from Klaus Schwab, people like John Stroer of Calvert, people like Paul Tudor Jones of the Just Capital Outreach Group, Larry Fink of BlackRock. I'll be getting to these folks in a minute. They are the ones who are really pushing this concept of stakeholder capitalism. And so this whole process of having a strategic and systematic approach to managing all people is no longer sort of a narrow clique of a few people. There are truly major organizations out there that believe that a strategic and systematic approach to managing people is critical to success. And when the in-crowd of business like these organizations and many more are talking about this, then you can be sure it'll be trickling down to CEOs all around the country and the world, as a matter of fact. So one of the main reasons for this is that organizations that have a strategic and systematic approach to engaging all stakeholders, they outdo their competitors. The Just Capital Exchange Traded Fund has outperformed the Russell 1000 by 3.3 percentage points since it was formed. And it's based on a survey of Americans on what they think is most important about the ways organizations treat people. And then there's the Engaged Company Stock Index that was created by the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, which significantly outperformed the S&P 500 over 6 years by nearly 35 percentage points, which by any measure is quite significant. That means if you put that same amount of money in the stock market, in its general standards, you would have achieved far less results. And finally, ESG funds in general are outperforming the standard indices right now on the stock market since COVID, demonstrating the significance of the significant competitive advantage of focusing on the needs of all stakeholders. So one of the major drivers as well is that the SEC chair, who's appointed by a Republican, because of course he's appointed by Trump, the President Trump, he's a very big believer in human capital disclosures, and he has actually stated in writing that it is material to the outcome of an organization and that this information should be disclosed in all sorts of human capital disclosures by public companies. So, and then CFO Magazine, one of the top magazines for CFOs, has come out very strongly that human capital is a major and material element of an organization's success, and that that companies must have a strategic and systematic approach to people management in order to achieve the best results. As I said, the SEC, not only the SEC has now pushed for such disclosures, but the European Union now requires human capital disclosures by companies with over 500 employees, or in some cases 250 employees, depending on the country. So US companies already have to make such disclosures in 26 countries in Europe. And there is nearly $16 trillion in investment capital now focusing on environmental, social, and governance-oriented companies. And 70% of consumers in the US in a recent survey said that they factor the way people are treated by companies in their investing or job searching decisions or buying decisions as consumers. And while this survey was done before COVID, there are many people that believe that, in fact, the COVID crisis has even put more attention on people, and that, contrary to the logic of some people, the COVID crisis is making CEOs value people and a strategic approach to people more than ever. Because at the end of the day, research shows that we've got to keep our promise. If we make promises, if it's worth spending money in advertising, it's worth keeping them. And unfortunately, marketing has done a very good job of misleading people, creating expectations that are not met, which of course yields dissatisfied customers who will tell other people that they don't like you. And at the end of the day, what's interesting about this is that in the old days, before the internet, the average unhappy person told about 9 people about their experience. Now, as a result of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media, one unhappy person can really wreak havoc on a brand. And the brand, even with all the artificial intelligence and whatnot, they may be able to detect and hear this noise. But at the end of the day, the only way to solve this problem is with a one-to-one approach. So I'm going to pause for a minute for those of you to give you a sense of the type of questions, and I'll be doing this throughout the curriculum. And that is giving you sort of some of the test questions that you're going to face, so you get an idea of what you need to know. And of course, you're going to have access to these decks and to these recordings, so you can either read the deck, you don't have to listen to me again, or if you have let's say a very bad case of insomnia, then I'll be happy to lull you to sleep there at midnight or 1 a.m. So what is enterprise engagement, and what makes it different from employee engagement? Enterprise engagement is a strategic and systematic approach to achieving organizational objectives by fostering the proactive involvement of all stakeholders and aligning their interests. Employee engagement focuses on employees. Well, that's not enough. We have to also engage our customers, our distribution and supply chain partners, and in many cases, our communities. Look at Amazon. They wanted to come to New York. They want all these big tax abatements. It never happened because their brand is such that people, a lot of people, just didn't want Amazon in New York. Maybe that was New York's loss, but indeed, this happens all the time. So another question is, what does enterprise engagement have to do with stakeholder capitalism? You're going to be hearing that term, stakeholder capitalism, more often. I promise you that, because again, the in crowd is talking about it. And so enterprise engagement it's the strategic implementation process of stakeholder capitalism. The Business Roundtable has come out and said that every company should address the needs of all stakeholders. Okay, how? It's not taught in business schools. It's not, there's hardly anything written about it in the business media. So you need a practical application process. What is the primary reason for implementing a formal approach to engagement strategies? It's to achieve a better ROI from the 50 to 60 to 70% of annual budgets a company spend on people, whether that's customers for marketing, employees, distribution partners, communities, or whatnot. So the idea is to get an ROI, a better benefit, to achieve organizational goals, to provide a better return to all the investors, and to create a virtual circle of prosperity that yields talent and employees and and customers who love your company, who believe it's great, and who recommend it to other people, which lowers your marketing costs. There's less litigation because less people want to sue you, and because people are engaged, you have fewer problems with safety. Finally, why are investors increasingly interested in organizations with a strategic and systematic approach to engagement? Well, because companies that are run that way outperform their competitors. And there's a basic, simple logic. Formal processes provide better results and an ROI to age-old challenges. Companies tend to approach things from an ad hoc approach. if you basically wait for a problem to happen and you react, if you generally run your business by coming up with bright, shiny object ideas like, oh, let's do a wellness program. Oh, let's do something to get rid of our attendance problem. And you do it in a kind of an ad hoc way, chances are you're going to get an ad hoc result. And finally, if you don't measure it and capture information from which you can learn for continuous improvement, chances are that you're not going to get continuous improvement. And you might very well have wasted money. I know it's not popular to say, but I think it's fair to say that the majority of recognition, incentive, loyalty, and training programs and events and other things, other tactics used to engage people are probably measured only about 20% of the time. And if so, generally measured only on whether people liked them or remembered them, and that most people are not familiar with the methodologies that are taught in this curriculum on how to measure the results of people investments and how to make sure they align with the organizational goals to provide an ROI. So it turns out that the wise people at ISO, and that's the International Organization for Standardization, they obviously, for those of you who have heard of ISO 9000 or ISO 9001, will recall that those are the standards that helped dramatically improve quality management in the US. In the 1980s, we were being pummeled here in the US by much better quality coming out of especially Japan, South Korea, and Germany. And so our manufacturing was suffering major let's say market share declines. And so the idea of taking a strategic and proactive approach to quality took off in the late 80s with the publication of ISO 9000, now called ISO 9001 quality standards. But what they began to realize in the mid 2000s is that they had hit a wall. While tremendous improvement in quality was achieved in the first 10 to 12 years, they were beginning to see that they weren't getting any additional improvements. And the good folks at ISO 9000 went back to the drawing board, and they discovered that they had left out the concept of people. And so they published the 8 principles of quality management, which endorse involving people in the application of any of the standards. And then in 2015, they published ISO 10018 quality management standards, and that refers to people. The name is longer and more obscure in 10018 standards for people involvement, but the name is being changed shortly to be simplified. I'm not allowed to tell you that name change, but it will be simplified. And anyway, those principles are always a customer focus, and it's not just the external customer. Everybody in an organization, in a way, is a customer. And certainly we always have internal customers, right? If we're in accounting, the customers are our management. If we're in sales, our customers is finance. Or if we're in customer service, our internal customers are the sales. So it's always important to consider that everybody, an investor in a sense, is a customer, and a community where I'm going to move my factory in a sense is a customer, because I want them to be happy with me. So a good organization addresses the interests of everybody who can affect the organization. So leadership is an important component, but it's not the only component, which explains why 20 years of leadership coaching has not really been effective. Employee engagement and customer engagement scores have not gone up in the last 10 to 20 years, despite lots of money spent on leadership. Involvement of people, getting everybody engaged. Many companies fail to do that. Having a process and systematic approach, critical rather than being ad hoc. When you ever have a major problem, a war, a pandemic, anything like that, and we are totally non-political and have nothing to do with politics, but objectively speaking, when you look at business or any type of process, you want to see strategic and systematic. You want to see involvement of all the people. You want to have a leadership with goals. You want to focus on customers. You want to have a culture of continuous improvement. You want to have a factual approach to decision making. And this was written before anybody was arguing about facts. This is an ISO standard, an ISO principle. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at them sensibly. And then let's build mutually beneficial relationships with everybody involved, all the suppliers, everybody involved in our business. We want to work with them in a win-win situation. And then, of course, we also have to remember that engagement is emotional, it's psychological, and that it's not enough to be happy. There's lots of research that shows that happiness leads to retention, especially in employees, but it does not necessarily lead to engagement and shall we say, productivity and quality. So people need to have a clear sense of mission and goals. What's the why, as Simon Sinek says? They need a sense of emotional bonding. What's their emotional connection with the organization? Great companies elicit our love and affection. We have to be capable of doing what's asked of us. You could ask me to repair a nuclear power plant and give me an incentive, a trip to Tahiti, shall we say, after the era of COVID, and I wouldn't be able to win it because I'm not capable. And many sales programs fail because we set goals that people can't possibly reach. Fun is a big motivator, a sense of just fun, support, a feeling that the organization cares, task value, that whatever I'm doing, even if it's the drudgery of cleaning up my database in sales or being a janitor and cleaning up the bathrooms. Well, guess what? In the era of COVID, that's extremely important and it should be honored. And in fact, that's one of the great positive effects of COVID. People that have had terrible jobs with very little sense of meaning are now getting a fresh sense of task value. I just heard the other day of some famous movie star complaining that he's been doing way too much washing of dishes and too much laundry, and he's getting tired of it. And this is somebody who's probably worth well over $100 million. Feedback. People want the opportunity to give feedback, and they in turn want feedback. Very critical to engaging people. And some of you who've seen prior slides, and you're going to see more of this because this is so important. This is always on a test question. Silos. Silos are your biggest opponent or obstacle to success in any organization. HR, operations, admin, sales, marketing are often fighting for resources. They're dividing their time between the needs of employees and customers in the community. They aren't aligned, and a much better picture looks like this, where you have alignment across the organization, and we're all focused on the needs of all of our stakeholders. And likewise, some of you have seen this slide, and you'll see other versions because it's so important. Companies spend probably, it could be as much as $1 trillion every year on ways to market and leadership, and we've add everything in. And advertising, promotions, it could be $500 million to $1 trillion on people on all of these different things, and they're rarely aligned. They're usually working at cross purposes, and it's a tremendous opportunity to achieve better efficiency and greater performance, better ROI, and certainly this type of approach is going to have a big appeal to CEOs and CFOs who are looking at all these programs they're running now. And does this loyalty program really work? Is it creating loyalty? Is this length of service award program? Is our safety program achieving its objectives? What about these promotions we've been doing? What about those trade shows? What about that advertising? Any CEO who is not over this summer relooking at every single thing they're doing in their management of people is probably one of those very few companies that's simply so busy right now they don't have time to deal with it. So again, the approach is that you want to benefit, and this was the big lesson for quality management. You want to benefit from having everything aligned. What is our brand? What does it stand for? And what does it stand for to customers? What does it stand for to employees, to vendors and communities? And then, of course, I want to have an assessment process that's strategic. I want to have leadership then that's strategic to that goal. I want my leadership coaching to be based on what I've learned from my assessment and that brand. I want my recruitment talent brand to be consistent. I want my compensation and benefits to be consistent. I want my communications, both internally and externally, to be aligned with that. My training should support it, my innovation efforts, my rewards and recognition, analytics, feedback, and analytics, I should say, and feedback, all should be playing against that enterprise brand. And again, this is a very important slide for those of you who are seeking your certification, because so many companies suffer from the inefficiency of having rewards and recognition disconnected from innovation, disconnected from leadership coaching, and disconnected from their motivational speakers that they bring in. So it's just a great big mishmash. So the design framework of any type of approach, and you could apply this whether you're a Fortune 100 company, whether you're a tiny company, whether you're a Boy Scout or Girl Scout troop, whether you're a Hadassah or church or Islamic organization, whatever you are, a government campaign, you can apply a strategic and systematic approach to getting things done by having a simple framework. What am I trying to accomplish? Leadership isn't being a nice guy or a nice lady and expressing gratitude. I sound a little cynical, but I've been listening to some wonderful advice for 10 years, and it's all great advice about the expression of appreciation, of gratitude, recognition, culture, all very, very important. But we've been talking about it for 10, 15 years, and nothing has happened because, as we learned from ISO, we have to make it a part of a strategic and systematic approach. That includes assessment. What's our current state? If we're trying to achieve these goals, what is our what is the audience that we need to achieve that goal? What do they, how much do they buy into that goal? Do they have the tools to achieve that goal? We then have to look, if we want to achieve that organizational goal, and that might be the goal of my entire organization, or that might be the goal of a safety campaign. That might be the goal of a sales incentive campaign or an employee recognition campaign. This design framework is, as they say in philosophical terms, fractal. You can apply it to the smallest initiative to the biggest. So once you've decided, okay, what are our goals? How are we going to achieve them? We have to communicate it and make sure that everybody knows what they need to know. And we have to remind them. And it usually should be done in sound bites. And it should be delivered to them in the medium that they are most likely to see it. Then there should be learning. How would they need? There's probably something they need to know. And we need to make sure that we use our communication platform to support what they need to know. And we should make sure that our learning is based on the assessment that we accomplish. You see how important it is to connect these dots between the different processes that so many companies, frankly, silo. Innovation, we've got to build, that's involvement, getting people involved. So when we develop our campaign, and you'll learn about that in a later class, you want people really inspired to come up with ideas and to always be contributing them. And then you want to reward and recognize people for achieving these. And you might want to have strategies to foster loyalty and retention. And very important, of course, to have a technology platform. Today, everything is going one-to-one, one-to-one. We've been talking about it since the 90s, but and it's been happening more and more and more. And now, because of COVID, it has arrived. And it used to be that it made no sense for a toothpaste company whose average customer might spend $30 a year on toothpaste, maybe a little more. It didn't make sense to have a one-to-one relationship. You could do mass advertising, television advertising. That was the most effective way. Well, now it costs nothing to send out a communications individually to somebody who bought your toothpaste. Then the key is, what type of information do you have to provide to get them to open your email? Do you always want it about price? No. What we've learned from research and communications, it's about emotion, helping people, developing an affinity around your brand. And yes, you can even do that with toothpaste. So one-to-one technology, we have just begun to see the digital revolution. I'd say the digital revolution in most companies looks like the streets of New York in around 1910, when electrification began. You had wires going every which way. I think most companies, big companies especially, have a tangled up mess of layers of different things piled on, and that in the next 2 years, we're going to see a great simplification and a great harmonization and a great alignment of these one-to-one platforms, because it really doesn't have to be so complicated. And also, we'll be going into that in later sessions. And then most important of all, there has to be an ROI. You know, I sometimes hear people on my posts on LinkedIn complaining that we talk about human capital. Why do we make people sound like they're a thing or an asset? Well, in business terms, they are. We are. Now, obviously, we're not. And so anybody who's in internal or external marketing who treats us like robots, like capital, is a fool. But the CEO, the CFO, the board, the shareholders, the investors have to understand that that is, in most cases, our most valuable asset, our people. And that companies that ignore that are ignoring the place, the part of their business where they have the most potential to achieve greater value. And any CEO who opens up to you, I would have said in first class, maybe not now, but back when you can once again make great relationships by getting upgraded or whatever, CEOs definitely want to hear about ROI of money being spent. And they know instinctively increasingly that 80% of their value on their balance sheet is goodwill, and they don't really have a clear sense of what that goodwill is comprised of. That's your job as a practitioner, as a solution provider, is to help companies create more wealth out of the 60 to 70% in some cases of their budgets that are spent on people. So let's look at some of the granular benefits to organizations of having a strategic and systematic approach. Obviously, it increases the potential ROI of the potentially 50% or more that companies spend on people, usually with no good scorecards. And we'll be getting into that later on. Not today, but that's another course or class, I should say. It drives better results by aligning what people do every day to what the organization really needs them to do. It's not enough to make people happy. Yes, employee experience is important, but if it only fosters happiness, it's not going to get you where you need to go. It creates comparable data for effective decision making. You can look at scorecards. Is my productivity and quality and willingness to recommend to my employees and customers and distribution partners going up? What are the values am I getting from my supply chain partners? What type of litigation am I facing? Is it going up or down? What are my safety problems? So it lowers employment and customer risks. It rewards effective people management, and it provides metadata for national employment statistical bodies, human capital disclosures, and corporate responsibility reports, all of which we'll be talking about more. Remember, it's not enough to have increased employee satisfaction. So companies today should consider having detailed scorecards, such as this, that help them really take a look at their ratios of their customer, employee, and distribution and supply chain partnerships in terms of revenues and profits and costs broken down by category, turnover, satisfaction, engagement, costs based on ratios, turnover, recruitment costs. Obviously, more and more today, we need to be concerned about diversity, leadership development. What are our processes? Grievances are very important indices of friction, occupational health and safety measures, organizational culture. These are the types of scorecards that people-oriented companies are studying, and then they have to determine what are they going to report out to the general public and what are they going to use for their own management purposes. And then we're going to be talking about in a later session in more detail the master measurement model. It's one of a couple of very effective ways to measure the return on investment of almost any type of activity. We're also going to talk briefly about the ROI Institute's work. We're not a certification organization for them. We highly recommend them for people who are serious about measurement. Their measurement processes go more into how to measure the ROI of a meeting, how to measure the ROI of a very narrow process, and especially one for which a dollar outcome might be more difficult. So we'll be talking more about that as well in a later class. So some more possible exam questions. What are the key distinguishing factors between enterprise engagement and the current state of management and marketing? Obviously, this issue of being aligned versus silos. What are the essential principles of ISO quality people management? Don't worry about memorizing them. They're there. I showed them to you. What's really important to know there is that it's a strategic and systematic approach that links the interests of all stakeholders, and that it's process proactive, and that it's sensible and based on the best analysis of facts that's possible. And we all know that in a complex world, facts are indeed not always clear. So we just try to do the best we can without bias. That, by the way, is why the EEA firmly eschews any type of politics, because politics actually affect our ability to make sensible, objective decisions, because it's really, once you get into politics, it's sort of like being a Yankee fan versus a Boston Red Sox fan. You know darn well that you get those two people together, or a Patriots fan with a New York football fan, and you'll never get them to agree on anything, and they'll have completely different perceptions of the world. So we always focus on sensible, facts-based, unemotional, and objective, whatever you can. And then what are the essential benefits of an enterprise engagement strategy? It's financial, sustainable financial, but it's also better experiences, less friction, less litigation, lower litigation costs, lower retention costs, replacement costs, lower marketing costs. It all makes sense. So folks, I'm going to give you a little breather for a moment. We're going to start getting deeper into this. And if you do have any questions, you can, of course, ask them. I'll check my message board here. And so I'm now going to get into, and some of this is repetitive from what you've just heard. But again, I want this to be, or we want this to be effective learning, and we're going to compound on the principles. So once again, enterprise engagement, it's the emergence of a new discipline based on making the connection between people, performance, and long-term profitability. It is a strategy seeking to achieve long-term financial results by fostering the proactive involvement of all the key constituencies or stakeholders. It's a business model that you involve your community and customer in an ongoing conversation about every part of your business, but that also, of course, includes your employees. And remember, people want to be engaged. You know, we're going to talk a lot about science and metrics, but this is very much about an emotional connection, and people want to be engaged. And look at the work that people are willing to do over the years, extraordinary work. And they are willing to take tremendous risks. And, you know, this slide was obviously created before COVID. Well, we now have seen this in living and breathing color. And so what's really important to remember is that people want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They want a sense of belonging. They go on a meaningful journey. They know that their contributions make a significant impact or difference. My very first job was cleaning, I should say, 26 men's and women's bathrooms in a high-rise in Manhattan. I can assure you, I did not feel a part of anything bigger than myself. I did have a sense of belonging, of commiserating with the union employees who had figured out a way to make a good buck doing this and not die of boredom. Certainly did not feel on a meaningful journey. I did feel I was making the bathrooms cleaner for 26 bathrooms of people that didn't care because they made one great big mess of them every day. So how do you make that person feel a part of a mission? Would be easy, but I assure you no effort was made on the part of the company that hired me. And you know, the stakes are high because you do better. And this is additional research that's been done by Gallup showing the financial impact, the earnings per growth, or earnings per sales, I should say, it goes up significantly in companies that are rated great places to work. And a gentleman named Alex Edmonds, a professor of finance at London Business School, who's a big advocate for this approach to business, has just written a book called Growing the Pie, in which he makes a strong economic case, both through stock market data and other data, that companies that focus on people simply do better. And it's really an extension of the old service value profit chain by Schlesinger et al. In the 1990s. The professors, also James Heskett and other colleagues, found that there was a service value profit chain that was extended when people are engaged. When people really care, it goes beyond price, quality, and service. It becomes an emotional love. And whether you like Apple or not, they do exceptionally well because they've created a emotional connection. And I showed you that other ring of circles. Well, this is your ring of audiences here. And what's really important in this business model is having a sense that all of your people are part of your brand, and to come up with a brand that says something to all of your people rather than having different brands for different people. And to having a corporate strategic plan that ties in and links all of these audiences, so that you get a connection between your people, your performance, and your long-term profitability. And so your plan is strategic, and it looks at tactics. It has tactics, and those tactics we'll get into. In fact, we have a whole section on the tactics because you need to know what are the different tactics, and you can't possibly be an expert in all of them, like an advertising or marketing executive can't possibly be an expert in every marketing tactic. But you have to know enough about each one in order to make selections as to which are the appropriate mix to achieve your particular goals. And they're great companies. And in our book, Enterprise Engagement for CEOs, which if those of you who have joined, you should be getting your copies, or will be, or have gotten your copies already. But what do they all have in common? The companies in this book. They have a CEO who's committed to a strategic and systematic approach to engaging all stakeholders. They have a common view of the brand proposition among all their stakeholders. They have a process that involves their stakeholders. They're transparent. They share as much relevant information as they can. Now, remember, there's some competitive information you cannot share, and that sometimes creates ethical challenges. But you know, when you tell your employees information, it's going to leak. So again, this is why when you publish corporate responsibility reports or you share information with employees, you have to go with the old story. You better not share anything that you wouldn't want to see on the front page of your local newspaper. And then these companies, you're going to see systems, not just ad hoc, bright, shiny objects, systems to promote leadership, communication, assessment, training, diversity, innovation, loyalty, job design, rewards. All of these things will be part of it. And again, we have to understand the emotional connection. Always remember that our social needs are just as tightly regulated as our biological needs. We have feelings that are very important that we must tap into. And I'm now getting into the whole concept of employee recognition, or employee engagement, I should say. And in fact, recognition and appreciation are fundamental to our emotional state. They are critical to our motivation every day. It's one of the most deepest cravings of human nature to be, to need recognition and appreciation. But many companies stop with that. Oh, they set up a culture program, they bring in a culture expert, and maybe they have a nice little recognition program. But frankly, folks, that's just part of it. So another exam question. Enterprise engagement is the name for a discipline that connects what three things? Okay, people, performance, long-term profitability. People, performance, profitability. There's a distinction there. People, performance, short-term profitability. Employees, performance, long-term profitability. Employees, customers, suppliers. That's about the trickiest question that you're going to get. And the honest answer there is employees, performance, and long-term profitability At the end of the, pardon me, people performance and long-term profitability. There's the trick question because it's everybody, right? And it's performance, but it's long-term. Even though you can get a better short-term result from a better designed sales incentive program, the goal is really to have a sustainable profitability and sustainable results. And one of the major factors is always to assess, analyze, measure, and then act, right? Many companies act first, then assess, analyze, and measure. So choose the right survey tools. One of the, if you're going to use anything having to do with employee engagement, get a survey, a respected survey that has good benchmark data. And being part of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, we help you find such companies, and we do not charge for that, nor do we get fees for doing that from those vendors. And if we do, if we ever do, that will be disclosed. We track metrics to gauge, you track metrics to gauge performance improvements. You don't want to go to the CEO with a sales incentive, marketing, loyalty, or recognition program without ROI, and yet most people do. You want to translate any data that you get into action. You want to communicate actions and results and conduct feedback sessions periodically, reward and recognize managers and leaders and people. And then you need to have, you repeat that process. It's a continuous process. So the summary here of the principles: a new discipline offering a significant rewards for first and early movers, a holistic approach that requires enterprise-wide integration and commitment and involves all key constituents outside the organization and inside. It's part of an aligned process with the corporate strategy and planning. It leverages all people's desire to be engaged. It's sustained through measurement and continuous improvement, driven by appreciation, incentives, and recognition. It must tap emotions to secure the deep commitment required of employees, customers, partners, suppliers, and others, and it drives higher performance and better outcomes. So none of this is about the warm and fuzzy. Now, I'm going to, the next session, the next class is on customer and in-channel engagement. And I'm really going to stop here because I've talked about employee engagement and some of the key elements, and customer engagement is an entire element of itself. So we're going to incorporate that into the next plan and also give you time to go to your next call. But if you have any questions at this point, please feel free to ask them. If you don't have any questions, and I don't see any here, our next, I'll be sending out an email as to our next session. We'll be doing one next week, and that will be both live and recorded. We'll be doing one the following week. That'll be live and recorded. Each one we'll do in succession. They'll be live, recorded, and then available to you. And the decks will be available to you for self-study. You'll have the book, the CEO book, which is really all you need to know. And you'll also have that other book, which will really be a great desk reference for you. And all along the way in these programs, we'll be telling you the types of questions that you're going to get about what you need to know. And if you take notes on that and focus your studying on that, you'll do just fine. To achieve success, to get the certification, it is an additional $250, so do not do it until you're ready. And we do not, if you must get an 80% in the live class, and it will be questions like these. And if you don't get an 80%, you'll be given an opportunity to correct it. If it's just a minor problem, there's no additional cost. If you have to redo the class, there will be an additional cost depending upon the degree to which you have to redo it. But the CEP examination requires a solid knowledge that can be glibly explained to somebody, because if you can't explain it to the examiner, you're not going to be able to explain it to your management or to a client or a potential client, in which case this won't have done you any good. Finally, a little advertisement. The EEA also runs Zoom shows. You can find their schedule at enterpriseengagement.org. Those shows consist of interviews with top experts. We have one tomorrow with Dave Aldrich, one of the world's renowned experts in HR, who will be talking about a lot of these subjects about ROI. And all of these are free. and they are also recorded so you can get them later on demand. So if I don't see any other questions, which I do not, I'm going to let you folks go. I thank you very much for participating, and always feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have questions, because our goal is to have you succeed. Thanks a lot and have a terrific week.